there is more and more awareness that lifestyle interventions actually do have mental health effects that are sometimes even comparable to the effects that medication can have.
Welcome to the Brains on Brains podcast, brought to you by ECNP, where early career scientists speak with the most interesting experts in applied and translational neuroscience.
So welcome, my name is Marieke Klein. I'm a member of the Early Career Academy of ECNP, and I have the honor to meet Professor Brenda Penninx today. Brenda is a professor of psychiatric epidemiology at the Department of Psychiatry of the Amsterdam UMC in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and she is one of the leading researchers in the field of depression. Her large-scale and interdisciplinary approaches with which she maps the origins, causes, and consequences of depressions are really unique worldwide. For example, she leads the National Dutch Study on Depression and Anxiety, and I'm sure that she will explain a bit more about that during this podcast. Her work is of great importance for demonstrating and understanding the connection between depression and somatic disorders, such as cardiovascular disease and diabetes. She has also shown that there are different forms of depression, including one with typical melancholic symptoms and one with atypical and immune metabolic features, which seem to require different personalized treatment approaches and strategies. And I think this can really be considered one of the major breakthroughs in depression research. So welcome, Brenda.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
You studied health science and you obtained a PhD in epidemiology at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. And afterwards, you worked for several years in the US before you then returned back to Amsterdam and became there a PI of the NESTA study. And I was wondering, considering your PhD and postdoc trajectory, how did you kind of choose to end up in this field of science where you're now successfully working in?
Yeah, well, you used the word choose. I'm not sure whether I have very clearly chosen things during my career, so maybe that's already a first message. Things kind of happened in a certain way. And like you mentioned, I'm trained as an epidemiologist, and epidemiology you can apply to all kinds of conditions. I happened to end up in the field of aging, working with older adults and doing research, large-scale epidemiological studies in aging. And what really attracted me within that field is the link between mental and somatic health. Okay. And that is actually how my career started and how the focus on mental health became very important. Because I think, it's really clear from aging, but also all kinds of other studies, that mental disorders and somatic health disorders are so closely intertwined and related to each other that really drew my attention. And I wanted to better understand that. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to also see what we can do to break that cycle between mental and somatic health conditions.
Yeah. Was that also one of the reasons why you decided to go abroad, to go to the US for your postdoc?
Yeah, so after I finished my PhD, I basically wanted to see how research was being conducted and what the research atmosphere was in other places. And I was still young at that time, so that was my main reason. I did not think too much about what that would do for my career. But in hindsight, I think it has been extremely important for my career. But that was not really what at that moment in time I had in mind. I worked for a few years more specifically at the National Institute of Aging, where they had lots of aging epidemiological studies, and where I really was able to work even more with depression data and detailed somatic health data.
So that is where your interest in depression origins from that time?
Yes, correctly. Okay. And that really started out with aging. I'm still very interested in the role of biological aging, for instance, but also understanding underlying mechanisms that link mental to somatic health. So it started with aging, but during my career, I actually started looking at more and more younger people, because right now in the Netherlands, actually, we already look at certain studies where we look at kids that are 10 years old. And that is really from the idea that the developmental of lots of mental disorders, including depression, is generally starting at early age. So in order to really understand this intertwined relationship between mental and somatic health, it is relevant to look at all kinds of age trajectories, but also going to the younger age.
Yeah, and I assume that also was one of the motivation to when you came back to the Netherlands to work on this NESTA study, to really follow.
Yes, indeed. After a few years America, I was being asked to lead the Netherlands study of depression and anxiety, like you mentioned. So that was also for me a reason to come back. It was really scary because I really loved my work in the US as well. And the US, I think, is also great in terms of scientific excellence, scientific networks, collaborations, and there's a lot going on. But yeah, the Netherlands was setting grant funding aside to really stimulate mental health research. And really by giving quite a lot of money, a few millions for a 10-year project, which is, I think, still quite unique. That's how NESTA started. Yeah. And 10 years at that time was really long. And now we have been able to extend NESTA with additional 15 years of funding and assessment. So this is already a study that is going on for quite some time. We started in 2003. And we're still working and extending on the assessments we do in the study. So the basic idea of NESTA is really following people in their naturalistic course. Have a lot of people with depression and/or anxiety disorders in our cohort, and also healthy controls. And we basically observe how people are doing and try to understand and maybe even predict how they are doing in the future. Not only focusing on mental health, but also on somatic health. So that's what I really brought also to that study, is to have a broader vision than only how the mental health disorders evolve or remit or relapse, but really connected to functioning and to somatic health components.
Yeah, very important. And it's a wonderful resource, of course, the whole project. I was also wondering, you said that you got the 10-year funding, but of course you got also grants from the European Commission, from other funders, also very prestigious national grants, of course. Do you think that getting such grants is really one of the key points that make your success in science? Is that something that really was very remarkable for your career, or how would you describe them?
Yeah, I really think having success in grant funding is still quite crucial in academia, maybe too crucial still. We talk a lot about team science, and we know that not everybody can, be a leader and get the grants in. And even if people get the grants in, they don't do that on their own. They are usually really working in big teams. I completely realized that because I think NESTA is really a team effort. It's not an individual effort.
Yeah, I was going to point on that, especially with this interdisciplinary approach, right?
Yes.
It's not something that you can all do on
you
your
can't,
own.
You can't do that alone. And the NESTA project is also a multi-site project. So it's not just only from my university in Amsterdam, but it's really a collaboration with the University in Leiden, the University in Groningen. So different groups and different people involved. And I think that has really contributed to the success of NESTA as well. But yeah, also getting a few key essential grants that can really show the worth and the value of these kind of research infrastructures that we can have in psychiatry have really been essential as well. So I think it's really a combination of grants and showing the value and the additional questions you can address with, for instance, some additional investment in the research infrastructure that we set up, but then also having the team collaborate on it.
The research infrastructure, of course, that one important thing that you need to set up to have successful studies like NESTA, right? And I think the other aspect that makes your project or your research so successful is this interdisciplinary view on things, right? Yeah. Combining the somatic and the mental health field. So when you look back on when it kind of started and originated, what was really the driving question or the main problem that you wanted to address and to answer? Was it just the big unknown, or was it immediately clear you want to bring something to the clinic? How did you approach that in your questions?
Well, I think if I more generally look at mental health care in the Netherlands, but I think it's not very different in many other countries, there is very often a huge attention for mental symptoms, mental disorders. But I think it's not very well integrated with somatic health and somatic health care. And yeah, I think that is quite an important observation. And I think it's also important to be more aware of that, and also use it to provide additional treatments to patients, for instance. So one of the fields I have worked in quite a lot is really examining lifestyle, which I think is obviously a key component in understanding why depressed people have a poor somatic health and why people with somatic health may experience more depression. I think that really has a lot to do not just with neurobiology, but also with unhealthy lifestyle. So we know, for instance, depressed people, they score worse on all kinds of lifestyle indicators. They smoke more often, they drink more alcohol, they sleep poorly, they eat poorly, they are not very physically active. So these are, I think, are key components that we can also consider as targets for our treatments. So that is one area where in the last years we worked a lot on to see whether, for instance, nutritional approaches or running therapy to stimulate physical activity are beneficial, not just for mental health, but also for physical health. And I think there is more and more awareness that lifestyle interventions actually do have mental health effects that are sometimes even comparable to the effects that medication can have. There's also the awareness that lifestyle interventions don't work for everybody, like most of the drugs don't work for everybody. So also that is a matter of trial and error and finding out what works for whom. So the whole idea about precision psychiatry, I think, is also very relevant for the field of lifestyle interventions in people with depression. So we did some studies, and I think it's amazing to see that no matter how you look at it, the physical activation studies actually do lead to better somatic health. And we know that some of the medications actually do worse in terms of somatic health consequences. And I think we need to be aware of that. It's not to say that that means that you always have to choose for healthy lifestyle interventions, because obviously there are a lot of people who need medication who benefit from it. But I think we need to better integrate lifestyle interventions also in mental health care settings. And that, I think, is still work for the future, because I think we can do much better than we currently do. So that is one part. And another part is really better understanding the neurobiological mechanisms that link mental and somatic health, because that could really give us newer starting points for new interventions as well. So that is another area where I've spent quite some focus on. For instance, studying the biological stress systems in the body, focusing on the immune system, but also other stress systems like the autonomic nervous system or the HPA axis.
Yeah, and they will all kind of interact, right? So
they interact. They're not so isolated.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes. That's how the human body works.
Yes.
I was wondering about what you just mentioned. So this heterogeneity of patients, right? Not everyone will respond to the same treatment in the same way. And you mentioned the buzzword precision psychiatry or precision medicine in there. So what is your approach? How can we design the research or help figuring out which patient will respond to which treatment? Where are we there in the field? What's the state of the art there, basically?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really important question, and I think a really relevant question for the field. I think there are multiple aspects that can contribute to at least getting better clues to the answer on, how does precision psychiatry work for depression. I think we really need to still work on better understanding the neurobiological basis, but also realize that there is a lot of heterogeneity in the neurobiological basis of depression. And different pathophysiological mechanisms can lead to different symptoms that people with depression experience. And depression is really heterogeneous. In fact, it is so heterogeneous that certain symptoms can have opposite ends in patients. So think about sleep. We do have depressed patients that have hypersomnia, that are really difficult to get out of bed. They can sleep the entire day. That's what they experience. But we also have depressed patients that are suffering from insomnia. They can't fall asleep. They get up in the middle of the night. They can't go back to sleep. So that is quite a different phenomenon. And for me, it's impossible to comprehend that there can be one similar underlying pathophysiological mechanism to those opposite ends of a symptom dimension. So I think we need to still spend more energy and effort in understanding what exactly is the pathophysiology mechanism in a single individual. And can we, from that pathophysiological mechanism, understand specific symptom dimensions or symptom expressions that people have? And for instance, if you go back to the Nesta data, also we observe a huge heterogeneity in the types of symptoms that people experience. But like you mentioned in the introduction, some people are scoring very similar in terms of severity or in terms of their limitations that they experience in daily life or the comorbidity of anxiety, which is very common in depression. But despite the fact that they are as severely depressed, they do have different types of depressive symptoms. And that is something that we are exploring more and more, because I think that is really also telling us probably something about differential pathophysiology that is underlying. And obviously for the future, that is where we want to go to, that you understand for people with certain symptom expressions, what is the underlying pathophysiology, so that you can target that pathophysiology. And really, that's obviously the thought behind precision psychiatry, that you target directly the neurobiology that hopefully leads to better mental health.
This still, to me, sounds like some more years of research and some more years of implementing it in the clinic. So it's
but I think it's really important to see that there is now a lot of awareness, and not just only from the academia side, but also from clinicians, and I think also from industry. I think also in industry they are more and more aware of really going more fine-grained to understand whether certain medications work for certain patients and what that patient group looks like. And I think as a field, what we need to do is use better, validated, more precise assessments that measure the most important symptom dimensions. And also do that in a uniform way. I think we're really, as a field, we're suffering from the fact that everybody wants to use their own score and their own questionnaire and their own observational approach. But that really makes it sometimes really difficult to validate findings and see whether they're really consistent across studies. So I think as a field, that is really a focus point as well.
I understand. So the phenotypic heterogeneity that we assess with the different questionnaires, that is one of the bottlenecks there. But so if you think about the future, right? So what will come in the next years and your wishes for that? Do you think we are getting closer to having some more biological measurements for the different subtypes of depression that can tell you about treatment, management, or diagnostic approaches?
Well, I think it's not an easy process, and I think we're really aware of that. But what I see, at least in the field that I'm working in, where we are focusing, for instance, on immunometabolic dysregulations, that we do see in about 25 to 30% of the depressed people in Nesta. So it's not there for everybody. We try to understand, we try to use imaging, but also genetics to tease out whether this is truly, a causal relationship or not. And then we are also conducting some treatment studies where we see whether when you target immunometabolic dysregulations, for instance, using anti-inflammatory medication, whether that is beneficial, especially for that subgroup of patients with immune metabolic dysregulations. And we're really now doing trials where we not treat all depressed people, but really at the entry of the study, select people with immunometabolic dysregulation. So it's meaning quite a lot of extra effort for a clinical study, but I think this is really what the consequences of precision psychiatry.
Yeah, it's one of the first groups that you can really sub-select from the whole pool of heterogeneous patients.
And obviously we need to do a better job in finding for whom these interventions could work. And I'm also really happy to see that also, for instance, within some of the ECNP networks, we talk about it. We talk about sharing data, looking consistently across different studies that try to examine the same, to really not have all these individual study findings, but really think as a field whether we can combine efforts and combine the data that we have to address these relevant questions.
Mm-hmm. So again, the team science spirit
the team
that comes up
science.
here.
Yes, I think I'm a strong believer in collaboration in an interdisciplinary way, and that is what I think maybe is quite core to my research career from the beginning.
It looks like a red thread that goes through it a bit. Yeah, I think that also brings us to a bit of more your career insights, right, or challenges that you may have encountered, because I can imagine that not always, and looking back in your career, that not always other people were so keen on sharing data immediately or on the team science that we are maybe used to right now. Is that an obstacle that you encountered? People are a bit restrictive, or were there other main challenges that you thought, oh, that's something?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's always people that are restrictive. I think it's more and more regulations that are restrictive. I think these days with the GDPR regulations, it's, for instance, not very easy to share data and collaborate with America, for instance. So that is sometimes bothering me, and I think it's harming the field sometimes. But no, I think obviously there are persons you can better collaborate with than others, but I really like the interdisciplinarity and the willingness, I think, of lots of people to learn from collaboration. And I can hardly think of studies that I have done as a single-site study. So I think in my career that has really been a red line, that I like not just multi-sites, but also different disciplines. You know, I'm not trained myself as a neurobiologist. I'm not trained myself as a geneticist. I'm not trained as a clinician. But I do think I can bring these disciplines together and make certain that they, collaborate and work around the same relevant topics. And that is something I also like. And that is what I would also tell to early career scientists. Don't look too close at only what you're doing, but really go to meetings like ECNP, for instance, to really learn what are the central themes and approaches in the wider area of brain health. And be open and think about collaboration already very early in your career.
Yeah. Is that also something that really keeps you motivated? So having the different fields where you always can learn something new, or where you can go a bit beyond your own boundary of knowledge and then explore new horizons?
Yes, completely. I think even in my phase of my career, I still learn on a daily basis. And I sometimes still feel stupid, about some theories or research methods that I don't understand completely yet, and that are popping up. But I think it's really fun to be working in a stimulating field where you can learn and where it's okay to say, you have such a great research method. I don't know much about it, but can we work together on it? Or can we work on sharing that expertise and implementing it in what we are doing, for instance? So I think it's a nice opportunity for early career scientists also that they should utilize. And obviously look beyond one single lab. I think I really learned a lot from going to America, going back to a different group, collaborating with different groups, being exposed to different people with different backgrounds, I think is really stimulating. And I think in the end will really help your career as well. Yeah.
So when you look back a bit throughout your career, so from your PhD and postdoc and early PI, what was then the environment or the thing that you always liked most? Is there something where you think, that I really got excited?
You mean a certain group?
Yeah, or maybe you can give an example. For me, it's when we brainstorm about research projects. That's always a special feeling like, this could fly. This is really cool. And then I get very excited and really want to start immediately. So maybe there's something similar where you think that's...
Well, I think, I think as a scientist, I still like working on research grants the most, because I think, it really forces you to think about how can I progress the field. It forces you to read on, the latest state-of-the-art findings, obviously, to make certain you build on that. So I still like that a lot. But I also really like supervising early career scientists to, write their PhD thesis. I think it's also really nice to see people grow in their career and becoming more and more independent. So I enjoy that as well. I think I enjoy overall management a little bit less. So that's also what I learned. And if you ask me about the obstacle in my career, then sometimes, you get these decisions on, should I become big in organization and in the management of our medical center, for instance, or should I just stick with research? Those are sometimes questions that will get to you when you're older. But I really still like doing research too much to really leave it behind completely.
Yeah. You mentioned that you really like grant writing. So maybe for the early career listeners, do you have a good tip on grant writing?
Yeah, I think grant writing is quite different from paper writing. So I think people should be aware of that. I think what really helps me is the really why, how, what questions, and really start with maybe an elevator pitch.
Oh, yeah.
Why do I want to do this? How do I want to do this? And what does it solve? I think if you can tell that in 3 slides or in a few minutes, that helps writing, because it's really much more about how to sell your new idea. And instead of a paper, it should be crisp, it should be clear, it should be upfront, which is very different sometimes from how you write a paper. And really talk about it with people, express what you want to do, get people that think along, that read along, start early enough. I think it's such a pity that you spend your time on a grant and it can be sometimes weeks. If you don't start early enough, it are lost weeks, because I think it will not be a good research application if you have not thought about it well enough and prepared for it well enough. Yeah, so I think those are some advices I learned from experience.
Yeah, also from experience that grants can get rejected, I assume, right? It's not always
you need to become a little bit resilient, and there it's also really important to be sharing that with some peers or some supervisors. It is sometimes a difficult field to work in. I have written grants that were not successful also. But usually, and sometimes you don't want to admit, but when you then resubmit a grant, usually it has become better over time. So it sometimes really also shows that maybe the first round wasn't good enough yet. And I think really also, even if it's not successful, I think you really gain a lot from writing a grant, and you take ingredients that you can later utilize in other applications or other collaborations that you can continue to do.
Yeah. So it's not completely lost time.
It's not lost time, no.
No, and it can also be inspiring, of course, to just think about new ideas and how your research wants to bring the field forward. Right?
Yes.
That's important. I think that moves us a bit to what's your vision on the field, right? We talked already a bit about the personalized treatment strategies, and that this can, at some point, really be a breakthrough in the depression research. Do you think that the scientific landscape as we have it now, we have big collaborations, we have interdisciplinary teams, we try to build up infrastructure that we share. Do you think that is enough? Will that landscape need to be changed to really move the field forward? What is your take on that?
Well, whether it's enough, I can't foresee, but it's at least necessary. It's really, the necessary steps that we need to set up as a field. And I think there are quite a lot of developments. I think also the EU, for instance, I really admire the fact that in EU studies, you sometimes have to do things in several countries. And I think that really stimulates collaboration and also, obviously, validation of approaches that we have. I think that collaboration with industry is also relevant. And I think also the collaboration with patients is relevant. I mean, we can have lots of thoughts about potential new targets or new symptoms that we should zoom in on. But I think it's also really important to keep a very strong link with patient organizations. And they sometimes tell us, things that we probably all know, but I think are really relevant to, hear that echoed in our heads. So things like, should we really zoom in too much on specific symptoms? For them, functioning is, for instance, much more important. And that sometimes is not always in our visions when we evaluate interventions or evaluate treatment approaches. So I think, that's something we really need to consider as well.
And what do you think are the main challenges for your field of research, but also like maybe applied neuroscience in more general?
Well, I still think it is quite crucial that we have some good examples where precision psychiatry really starts to work. And I think we're sometimes looking at other fields like neurology, for instance, where I think they are moving a little bit faster in the field of precision psychiatry than we in psychiatry. But some good and well accepted and well validated research lines that really show evidence that precision psychiatry works. I think we're really eager to find that out. And that's in depression, for instance, there are a few very specific studies going on to address anhedonia, for instance. I think in the immunopsychiatry field, there's lots going on. So I really hope that some of the collaborative studies that are going on there really give us some successes, because I think then, that really will move, I think, the field quite fast in a positive way forward.
Yeah, I can imagine. So once you really, it's established that one of those subgroups maybe benefits from anti-inflammatories and that can be implemented in the clinic, that's what you're pointing at. I assume, right? Yeah. Bright future, right, ahead, once we are able to show that. I think that kind of gives a nice overview of what your research is aiming for, right? So this really interdisciplinary team science that brings us to combine different fields, thinking about lifestyle intervention for this heterogeneous group of people, making the transition to the clinic ultimately. I think it's a very nice and ambitious line of research that you proceed. We also heard some of those really key points for the early career scientists. I think there were some great tips on grant writing, on moving a bit, looking at different labs, proving different atmospheres, but also keep your eyes open beyond your own little projects.
And enjoy science. I think still this is a field that is really exciting to be working in. So really enjoy what you're doing, because I think it's really the greatest profession you can be at.
I think that's a wonderful wrap up of this podcast episode. Thank you so much, Brenda, for your time, for sharing your insights here with us. Thank you to all the listeners joining us here today. I hope you will like our other episodes that will come in the future, and enjoy your day.
Well, thanks. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from ECNP. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the interviewee and do not necessarily reflect the official position of ECNP. The content of this podcast should not be used in any way as the basis for treatment decisions.